it's just one of those things where the answer is there, but it actually takes leadership. It takes electing people who are willing to say no to the status quo, no to groups who just want things to continually be the same.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome to Diggin In The Crates Hip Hop Podcast, the Hookah and Max Show. We were just listening to Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5. It's like a jungle, sometimes it make you wonder. And today we have mayor candidate Justin Outling, and hopefully, just from reading a little bit about your bio and things that you talk about how Greensboro is the city that's very promising. I can see that, and so when I'm thinking about this song, oftentimes we live in the concrete jungle, but it's the fact that we need to understand what the concrete jungle is all about and how the line shines on us. And I'll use this word today is that in the Greensboro, we stand on the heroes of giants in our community, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss that today. So if you could just introduce yourself to our audience and let them know just a little bit about you before we get into our today's. And again, today's episode is where hip hop meets politics. So without further ado.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. My name is Justin Outling. I'm a member of Greensboro City Council, and I'm running for mayor. Most important thing to know about me is I deeply, deeply love Greensboro. In all the really significant and important ways, it's the foundation of who I am as a person. My wife, Cora, and I, we met as freshmen at UNC Greensboro. Our two kids, Clark and Claire, go to Jones Elementary School in the Warnersville neighborhood. And in addition to being a city council member and mayoral candidate, I also work as a law firm called Brooks Pierce as an attorney.
Okay. And you mentioned Warnersville. I think Warnersville is one of the oldest community. What do you know about Warnersville and its importance to Greensboro?
Yeah. Warnersville is a tremendous community, and our kids, Clark and Clara, have the pleasure of going to school there. In terms of Warnersville's significance to the city of Greensboro, I mean, historically it was really the center of black life in the community. And part of the reason why I'm running for mayor is recognizing that government can do tremendous things to uplift or harm communities. And in our cities and countries' histories, we did a lot of things to harm communities like Warnersville that were the home to prominent black businesses, where you had black home ownership that was really helping to create a black middle class. And so it's incumbent upon those of us who have the privilege of having an opportunity to serve to repair some of that harm caused.
What are some of your favorite political songs that you can recall?
Oh man, this is pretty easy. I'll name the artists. Top 5 hip hop. Period.
Okay.
I'm gonna get out there and say it.
Okay.
Black Thought.
Welcome into the dark. When I first spark the arts, when the listening start, open your head wide and let the thought inside. My style fortified by all of Philadelphia.
Black Thought.
Okay.
Yeah. Black Thought for sure. Black Thought for sure. In addition to Black Thought, I'm a really big Talib Kweli fan.
Okay.
And Compton. So it's a generation ago, but I think those three are criminally underrated. And whether it's today's time, 2 decades ago, they're definitely all up there right at the top.
Mm-hmm. What about a group like Public Enemy? You're familiar with them. What do you think their message is? Again, speaking against social injustice.
Yeah. I mean, they're originators in terms of that perspective in hip hop. So I think really, really important stuff. I just like Black Thought. I'm somebody that really loves the lyrics and lyricists, and so those three especially. But obviously they're coming behind Public Enemy,
Yes.
EPMD, Big Daddy Kane. So, they laid the foundation. But again, top 5, I got to go with Black Thought.
Yeah, Black. There's something that I saw recently on Facebook where they're at a park and they got this nice little backdrop that says Roots Picnic.
Yeah.
And I mean, Black Thought is he's going from one song to the next. They're all instrumentals, and one of them is it's a group called the 2+1 whatever, but it's an old song and they did it on what show was that? They did it on the BET Awards, and they continue to use it.
As I pick up the Zig 9, beef starts with the shove, then ends with the shovel. And standing on your corner reminiscing of you, but you
Look, it's been about more than just the flesh. It's so ill I could still never catch my breath. It's so real in the field, so protect your neck like you was in the 7th seal playing chess with death. I figure I'll be a sage for the rest of my days. The way I surf to the stage on the crest of a wave, like a black pharaoh that suckled on the breast of a slave. If you place me on a page, don't mess up the name. It go.
I think what's important is the delivery.
Yeah.
And then it's not like, did you watch the Super Bowl?
No, I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but I actually know that the video you're talking about, they're outside in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
It says Roots Picnic or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and see what's interesting, I didn't know that Questlove, could, get on the turntables like that. He's always noted for, playing the drums, but you're all right, Black Thought, LL Cool J, KRS One, J. Cole's is Nas, of course.
Yeah.
Nas is I don't think he gets a lot of credit, but he's a lyricist. But I will Common. Is there a certain thing you like about Common? Because Common, the song he had, I Used to Love Her. He's talking about kind of how he's in love with hip hop, and so what do you know about that particular song?
Yeah. That's obviously one of my favorites. But one of the things I really like about Common is he's done some albums where he's really looked to stretch and do something different and kind of lead a new sound. And so he had an album a while ago, Electric Circus.
Okay.
That a lot of people didn't feel it because it was kind of out there. And it was when he was dating Erykah Badu, but I'll leave that alone. But I thought it was a great album. He was looking to do something different, and for me, it's easy to follow the crowd and copy somebody else's sound. But I got a lot of respect for people who lead and create a new sound and do something different. I thought he did it brilliantly.
Yeah, I mean, again, I Used to Love Her is my favorite one, and then you have Main Source, which Nas was a part of. He used to call him Nasty Nas.
Yeah.
And so, if you looking at the front door video, you got a cello, big cello. They look like they're in a factory somewhere in Greensboro. But it just reminds me of what the essence of hip hop is, and so I'm very delighted that you're talking about all these things. And I can remember being in basic training, and I saw the album cover of Nas, and so I was telling my battle buddy, because he was from New York, I was like, man, that's just a little kid. I thought it was a rock album. So he's like, nah, you need to pick this up. So, of course, in basic training, we got to go to the PX and stand in line, and we wasn't actually, we wasn't supposed to buy it, but so I snuck over there and bought it and stuck it in my little knapsack, got back there. And at night, we have fire guard. So I had fire guard right before everybody wakes up. So he said, Hook, you need to listen to it. So I put it in. And as soon as I heard the first song, I was just like,
that's it.
Yo, that was it.
Yeah.
And then I started listening to it when I'm running PT early in the morning. So it just lets you, again, sort of the essence of hip hop. But let's go for one of
I got to stop you because I had that same moment when I was in college and heard a Greensboro native, Little Brother.
Okay, yes.
And Fonte. And right when I heard him on the listening, I was like, this is it right here. So, although he's not, I wouldn't put him in that political rapper category. And I wish he came out with more music and more albums. I had that same feeling here.
Yeah, Little Brother, his mom works at A&T.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
And I didn't get on to Little Brother until 2011, 12.
Okay.
So my friend was like, man, Hook, you behind the power curve.
Yeah.
And then when I started Chitlin Circuit, and I was just like, yeah, I do agree with. I think that, but it's interesting though. A lot of people don't know that Fonte was in Color Purple.
What?
Yes, he was in Color Purple.
The movie on Broadway?
No, the Color Purple, the actual movie.
The movie.
Oh,
Yeah,
That's
in
crazy.
the beginning, he was one of the little boys,
Oh.
and we, I got a chance to, ask his mother. I didn't ask him directly, but he was in there, and then, I did find out that he got to do a track for Michael Jackson before he died, but he was supposed to work with him, but I don't think it ever came out. Then, of course, Knife Wonder,
Yeah.
great producer and big rapper, Big Pooh. And it's funny because they don't get that much publicity in North Carolina.
It's crazy. It's funny because he'll even shout out stuff in Greensboro. I remember one song he shouted out Aycock Middle School, and it's just crazy. And you talk about the talent that comes from our city. I mean, he's Grammy nominated. Doesn't get bigger than that.
Exactly. For our viewers, can you talk to us how you got involved in politics, and what is it that made you passionate to even step out and run for city council in a District 3?
Yeah, I met my wife at UNC Greensboro, and we left for a little while when I was in law school and she was in graduate school. And we came back to Greensboro when I worked for a judge.
Okay.
And realized, even beyond college campus, this is a really tremendous and special place.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had lined up accepting jobs elsewhere in New York. But after we had our first child, we wanted to move back home to North Carolina. And then really from that point, I really threw myself into trying to make the community better in small ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that included serving on a volunteer board of the city that was responsible for enforcing rules about making sure that all housing meets minimum baseline standards.
Mm-hmm.
You see, Hook, I tell you, the conditions that some of our neighbors, especially children, live in,
Yes.
it'll absolutely break your heart. And, we were able to do some really tremendous things on that volunteer group,
Mm-hmm.
but I was able to see that to affect really larger structural changes, you couldn't do that as a volunteer on that commission. You had to be on the city council to actually create the rules, change the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really was the foundation of my desire to serve.
So speaking of housing, as you mentioned, from looking at your website, you want affordable, equitable housing. The first thing in my mind for citizens is, what is your stance on what is equitable housing? And my second question is many of these people who, whether beyond racial lines or just to make that clear, that they don't necessarily understand the law when it comes to them being a tenant. And then I can remember over there off Yanceyville when those people got burned up.
Yeah.
And you're telling, you're having something that hasn't been fixed.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is these people, they work, maybe 8 hours, 12 hours a day, and they don't necessarily have the time to say, okay, my stove is going out. So can you speak that a little bit? What is your stance on that? If you become elected mayor, how would you improve the quality of life? Again, I'm talking about most of the underserved area like East Greensboro, and those areas.
Yeah. And there's a lot of it. In Greensboro, we have 1 in 4 black persons in our community living in poverty.
Okay.
Which is a really scary thing. And it's more than just a statistic. If you look at the conditions of many of the homes in our community, the lack of being able to get healthy food readily, it's a really scary thing. Our job as a city and city government should be supporting everyone in our community, but especially those who need it the most.
Okay.
Some of the things that we've done, we can do a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
The city spends money supporting affordable housing, but far too often what it does is supports those persons, those families that make higher wages. Now, it's not to say that they don't need support,
Right.
but you're talking about, say, the average income, they're at 80% of the average income. The city should focus on supporting those who are at 30% of the average income, because they need the supports more. Also, You mentioned, there was a really heartbreaking situation a number of years ago where you mentioned several kids died in a fire
Exactly.
in a property that was in really horrible condition. The city has to actually enforce the rules against slumlords and not just give them a slap on the wrist. The family that had that property, they've been having horrible properties like that for longer than I've been alive. You're talking 40 plus years. City goes in a lawsuit with them and settles for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
That's unacceptable. And so, as a council person, I've used my position to enforce, we need to have affordable housing. Slumlords need to be accountable. But it's really that next level of being the mayor and having the bully pulpit to actually make sure that those things actually happen. And we just don't take the easy way out where we're slapping landlords on the wrist or doing affordable housing that's mostly a name and not an actually helping.
And it's a huge deal. I mean, again, I subscribe to underserved areas.
Yeah.
And I know in many cases of people that I know, I mean, they have, various, things that are not in compliance with codes. And I know that that's one of the city's biggest things is that these housing codes. So what would you, as the mayor, what would you do to enforce these landlords to get their, make sure that their houses or apartments are up to code? What can you ensure that maybe hasn't been done in the last administration? What would you do as a mayor to ensure citizens that, hey, if something is messed up in my house, that we're going to enforce that those codes are being met?
Informed by me being a lawyer, I know the way it works.
Okay.
And the way it works is you take people to court. And for any time you take someone to court, a slumlord to court, at the end of the day, you may end up spending more money than you actually get back out of that person because lawyers can be expensive. But what you're doing is you're creating a culture and an expectation where landlords know if they don't follow the rules, they will be taken to court and they're going to be worse off. That's a fundamental difference. It's kind of understanding the goal is not necessarily just to, at the end of the day, net as much money from this process of taking someone to court. It's, no, we're creating a culture and an expectation. And so slumlords know that they can't leave properties in substandard condition for years on end. The second thing is, immediately when I joined the council, I helped lead the council in changing the actual rules so that when there's a really bad property, you're not just left with two bad options. Demolishing a property, which gets rid of an opportunity for affordable housing, or just sitting there with it being in horrible condition. The city has the ability now, with the revisions I helped lead to our housing code, to actually make repairs directly to the property, actual making of improvements. And so the city should be doing that in far more cases to make sure that we're not just being reactive, begging a landlord or property owner to fix the property, which they sometimes can't fix because they don't have the money, or sometimes they won't fix because they're a slumlord. We're actually making sure that the buildings are safe condition first, and then addressing the landlord, because the goal is actually to have that safe, affordable housing.
The next thing I wanted to shift to is, police accountability, which is a big issue. I was at the Swarm game last night, and they were honoring the police department, things like that. But again, it's standing on the hero of giants is what would you do as a mayor to ensure that people aren't targeted or marginalized if they walk in a particular neighborhood or if they're doing a particular things? My first question, I'll follow up on another question. Making sure that police officers are trained when it comes to hostile, they're there to manage violence, not create. And the reason why I'm saying this is because we live in an age where it could be a common traffic stop, but the citizens, anytime a citizen pulls his phone out, he or she, what can you do to ensure that there's more proper training for police officers? I do know there's a shortage of police officers, but what can you do as a mayor to have more accountability between the community and the police department.
Yeah. It's on public safety, three things need to happen. There needs to be high standards. I mean, the standards need to be high. High appreciation. It's a really difficult job. We need to respect and honor that. And then high accountability. None of those things are inconsistent. And so in terms of, how do we make sure that policing is more fair, we need to actually take the bold actions and fix our rules to guarantee the fairness. Shortly around the time of the death of George Floyd, we had a situation in Greensboro where a community member called in to 911 and said, I see someone, a kid with something that's obviously a toy gun.
Mm-hmm.
Is orange. I think the person is wearing a black shirt, blue pants. The police stopped a young black boy on the AY Greenway, which is generally, just for context, generally, white persons are on that greenway.
Right.
It's just a fact. He did not match the description at all.
Okay.
At all. Simultaneously with that, another officer was also stopping in a different part of the greenway, was also stopping that black boy's uncle, who likewise didn't match the description. If you look at the rules now, I think for most people that doesn't sound right. That
Right.
it can be completely not matching the description, but there'd be no discussion about how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what the rules allow right now. And so we need to actually fix those rules by doing things like other communities have done.
Okay.
We just have to have the political will to actually do that. I think it's really important to recognize, though, that it takes leadership to do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Because while it may seem like common sense, and there may be a demonstrated history that if we do those things, looking at other cities, it's going to be successful, there are always going to be people who fight for the status quo.
Okay.
One example, when I first joined the city council, we were in the New York Times over disparities, persons getting stopped who are black versus persons getting stopped who are white.
Okay.
Essentially, black folks getting stopped way more, despite the fact that white folks and black folks were committing crimes at the same rate.
Okay.
And I thought, what can we do to help close that gap? Because obviously something is wrong there. I couldn't come up with an idea, quite frankly, but we had some community activists who said we need to have a policy that when the police want to search someone, of course, if they have probable cause to believe that someone did a crime, they can search them.
Exactly.
Of course, if they believe the person has a weapon, they can search them. But if they're asking for someone's permission to search them, which is called the consent search, it should be in writing.
Okay.
And there are other communities who have that written requirement, and guess what happened? Just from having that, the gap in the disparities began to close.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at, and I'll tell you, I was kind of skeptical. I wasn't a believer until I actually read the data, looked at the logic, and looked at the law. 1 month, a majority of the city council was supportive.
Mm-hmm.
The next month, after associations and whatnot voiced their opposition, a majority of the council, myself excluded, flipped their position and voted against making that really irrefutable change that undoubtedly would reduce the disparities in stops, blacks versus white.
Right.
And it's just one of those things where the answer is there, but it actually takes leadership. It takes electing people who are willing to say no to the status quo, no to groups who just want things to continually be the same.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's, speaking of crime, certainly crime happens on this part of Greensboro. But I think where it comes problematic is when it comes to the more well-established neighborhood. I can remember there was a shooting, I think right up here in Cornwallis.
I remember well.
A young man, his family got shot, and then all of a sudden it was just hysteria. And I'm making the point here is that then, there's a reward out, and then, a couple of days later, the person gets apprehended. But when things happen in the other part of the neighborhood is just things that happen every day. And I mean, you've been watching the news. There's been crime around the mall.
Yeah.
There's been
So true.
Yeah, and am I leading this in with, you know, what is your position on deterring juveniles from committing crimes? And I'm talking about economic development. I'm talking about programs. I'm talking about, I can remember 2017, I worked a part-time job in Burlington. They had this program called Project Challenge,
Okay.
which it deterred. And again, here's where people don't understand the law. I think it was Attorney Crump was. We were at a function and she was talking about how to deter. But Project Challenge was a program where some people don't have the necessary money to pay the restitution. They do smaller crimes, and I was responsible for picking the student up from school, taking the student to the community service, whether it's a soup kitchen, whether it's a thrift store, whether it's out in the park. Now, I'm just not there standing over them. I'm talking to them and getting to know them.
Yeah.
And it seems to work, whether their probation officer showing up. And in Burlington, I saw the juvenile, because they come out reports, and
Yeah.
it significantly changed their mindset. I had a kid said, Mr. Hooker, I never really thought about community service. This is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where's your stance on that as a mayor? Is there similar programs that you can maybe bring in or advocate for? And the reason why I'm saying this is no knock on cure the violence, but that's you have to have something tangible that you're pouring your money into. So, what kind of programs that you can work with local groups and communities that will help you to deter crime?
Yeah. The answer is definitely yes. What we should have in our city is a youth jobs guarantee for young persons who live in areas of the city where they're more likely to be involved in crime or victims of crime.
Okay.
And to be clear, this is a guarantee of a job from the city. The objective is to make sure that kids are off the street, especially during the summer, where crime involving kids happens to a much greater degree. But it's also creating equity and fairness in that those kids in high school, they're getting the same job skills, they're getting the same mentorship that more affluent kids on the other side of the city get when their father or mother's a lawyer or a doctor or more well-connected. But it's also addressing a long-term issue in terms of a driver of crime, which is poverty. So you're talking about finding a way to have more income to those lower income households, especially when it's needed, when your teenager can eat you out of house and home. These are things that the city should be doing and leading on, not just kind of hoping that private businesses will hire interns and the like. And there's something that cities have been doing a long time. I mean, Washington, D.C. has had programs like this time immemorial. Charlotte's had very similar programs, and we should be doing the same thing here.
And the reason why I mentioned that, going into my next, economic development is a big thing I think that needs, because you're talking about, the city is great.
Yeah.
Now, me myself as a citizen and as a business owner, I see it.
Yeah.
With being able to connect with one another. And so one day I get my hair cut on Bessemer. There's a car wash over there. And this is where the language, I'm talking about the language, I think you have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
So I get out and I said, how much is a car wash? So it'd be $20. So paid $20 and I got to sitting around and I'm looking at, okay, what would make this car wash viable? Not, you don't have to move. So I said, well, sir, can you tell me 3 things that you think that make your, I said, well, if I had shirts, okay. What else? Well, if it was clean and painted. then the next thing, he said, well, if I had, sort of a system, and he understood where I was coming from. I said, so how much is your rent? He told me. I said, well, just imagine if this was fixed up. So my next question is, are you at, as a mayor, and then talking to city council to create more economic development on the east side of Greensboro, because A&T draws in a lot of money to the city when it comes to homecoming, and students should have equitable places to go to that's centered right around A&T, because it seems like, I can remember at a city council meeting, I asked Roy Carroll myself, he said, well, when I go to cities, I go straight to downtown. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that's saying you're gonna go where the money is, but sometimes the money is where the diamond in the rough is. So what is your stance on that?
Yeah, successful cities, what they all do is they find a way to use what's great and unique about them to create more prosperity for everyone. Mm-hmm. I'm a UNCG Spartan.
Okay.
I love them.
Okay.
I love them.
That's fair.
Greensboro's unique asset is North Carolina A&T. The engineering school, the talent there, being the largest HBCU in the country, development and support should be focused around North Carolina A&T to create an innovation corridor stretching from North Carolina A&T, going through downtown, all the way to the Nussbaum Center, also in East Greensboro, mm-hmm. where the city is investing to make sure the infrastructure is there, the buildings are adequately supported, there's programs to support businesses that will come to Greensboro for talent and the like. That's what the city should be doing, using the unique asset of A&T to help create more prosperity for mm-hmm. everyone. And Hook, other cities have done this, and when they have, they've been successful. Mm-hmm. You look at our neighbor in Winston-Salem, when they focused on innovation in the medical area, great success. And it's helped out. They still have some ways to go, like all cities, but it's a great amount of prosperity from their actual focus. You look at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, similarly engineering schools at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh. Tremendous success for a community that was once based on a manufacturing economy. Okay. I mean, they have an innovation district where I think they have 10% of their population live in the district. It's 30% of their jobs. Okay. We should be doing the same with regard to Greensboro. And we have the unique asset there in North Carolina A&T, which quite frankly, has been hitting the cover off the ball the past 2 decades. And it's, I think it's just about as much of a guaranteed success as you can have in life.
Yeah, and not to, forget about, being at college, even though it's off, and, speaking again as a citizen, there's growth there, between being in college. UNCG often ask people, is Greensboro a progressive city? But if you look at the economic and the political landscape, it's uneven. And so there's things that the city has to do. Now, I'm not going to put it all on the city council, the mayor, what I am, and I've talked to people about this. So as a mayor, how approachable would you be, going to barbershops, beauty salons, even going to parks and rec games and stuff? What is your stance on that? And the reason why I'm asking you is because I think that when you talk about transparency, if someone is able to walk in and say, Mayor Outling, I'm trying to organize this in my community, because a lot of these kids that I've ran into, some of them are going to A&T, and so how approachable would you be to that regard? I know there's a process, you can't do anything, but how would you build that relationship so it's one, you're being held accountable, and the community is being held accountable at large?
Yeah, so it's an open door, number one. Number two, it's being out in the community proactively everywhere. So we go to barbershops. We've had talks in connection with our mayoral campaign at a barbershop. We go door to door, talking to neighbors throughout our community, east, west, and everything in between. But it's also recognizing that not everyone wants to be reached and contacted the same way.
Exactly.
And so now for, past 3 years, I've had a monthly session where people can just stop in and talk with me and others in the community about what's happening in Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
Even during COVID, because we couldn't always be together during this period, we've done it on Facebook Live.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing for some people they rather sit at home and engage that way. And so I think, that's a really important thing, both having an open door and being proactive. But at its core, the most important thing is recognizing that there should be accessibility for everyone, not just those people who are well connected to City Hall.
Right.
Because what we have now is, it's a different approach depending on whether or not you're well connected.
Mm-hmm.
By way of example, last week, the week before this most recent week, there was at time a little bit of a controversial situation where the city council was voting to sell some land right outside of downtown in East Greensboro to a international grocery store.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And a developer raised concerns, and I think it's valid concerns that he raised about parking. It's
Okay.
going to affect one of his properties. Totally fine. I can respect that. Hope the next week, or less than a week later, there was a work session on parking.
Okay.
We also have an explosive amount of crime and violence in our community
That's true.
that's not being worked on.
Right.
The Saturday, I think there were like 13 calls that the police responded to for shootings and a stabbing with a hammer.
Right.
There wasn't a work session call for that.
Right.
And so it's understanding, we want to be responsive to everyone, and we should be responsive to that developer because we want there to be economic development.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be responsive to everyone,
Yeah.
including those who are, really, in many areas, it's like living in a war zone in our community. So that same urgency and pressure we feel to respond to a developer, we need to have that for everyone in our community.
And I agree, because that is something that it continues to raise an eyebrow. I mean, there's crime, but why are these crimes being committed?
Yeah.
There should be roundtable discussions and I've actually reached out to someone who I noticed on the police department, and when I talked to him, he said one of the problems is that it becomes a shouting match, and I want to go back to what something you said. It's just, if you can sit down and have some solid discussion, because I know people, Councilman Outling, that they come to me because we've had this podcast, and I said, well, why don't you sit down and talk to council members? But they don't want to sit down and have an adequate discussion. They think things should just turn on the light like that. Now, I always believe, and my grandmother told me this, the real work happens when the lights are off.
Yeah.
When the lights are on, you can say whatever, just like me and you talking, but if you don't practice what you preach, then the title don't really mean anything. And so I think that you're right. I don't have the answer to it, but I'm always asked these questions. I never meet a stranger.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe that's something that you'll put in your campaigns, that there should be monthly meetings in these communities. Should be monthly meetings in barbershops, salons, and the reason why I say this based off your background, your parents and all, their occupation. What about people who are brick masonry, carpentry, electricians? They're people too.
Yeah.
And sometimes they get overlooked. I mean, when the pandemic hit, those folks were still working. And so, my stance on that is that there just needs to be more transparency between police department, city council, and residents, no matter where the demographics you live at, because at the end of the day, we all have to live here.
That's right. And at its core, the city council and the city have to really work at it.
Mm-hmm.
We've had, it's crazy. Greensboro's now ranked by the U.S. News the 8th most dangerous city in the entire United States.
Wow.
That's a scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've had record number of homicides, several years out of the past 5. 2020 was a record number of homicides.
Mm-hmm.
The city council met twice on violent crime, and actually working together, discussing it, looking at data as a council. Once at the beginning of the year, once at the end of the year. That's before the crime happened and after it already happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's unacceptable. The city council should be meeting every single month on the topic, making sure that its plans are being followed through, that adjustments are made where they should be made. And that's a part of the solution, is actually working at it as opposed to not really trying to pay attention to it until it happens on Cornwallis and West Greensboro.
Exactly. That's been that's been the topic of conversation. There's crime that happens every day around A&T and Bennett, but I think a lot of it has to do with just, you go to UNCG, you go down Gate City Boulevard, which once was Lee Street. They changed it. And again, I have no problem with development and stuff like that, but I think it needs to be equalized. The first thing you see is the police department. Now, A&T is a little bit different, but I still think that there needs to be summits with local communities, summits with youth. Now, sometimes it's hard to get the youth, but I think if you talk with them instead of talking down at them, that will serve the purpose. And then when, I'm a big proponent of criminal justice reform, and the reason being, now, I know somebody who works as a probation officer, and I asked her this question: what do you expect this individual to do if he can't get a job?
Yeah.
Why don't you advocate for him? Now, it's if they mess up, then that's their fault. But if they can't get a job, it's like civil death. Now, I'm not saying that what they did is, of course, what they did is wrong. But I'm talking about the rehabilitation process. So what before we end here, what kind of programs you think you can offer for work programs that you can offer for people who may have been convicted of a felony or other smaller crimes to ensure that, you heard you mention this work programs where when they get out, they can become productive members of society, when they can vote, they can do many other things to breathe life back. What can you do as the mayor to ensure some of those things are tackled?
Yeah, so part of it is working with community and other partners like Guilford Works to make sure that persons have the skills when they come back home to actually be in jobs. Another part as mayor, though, is actually using the position of the mayor, the bully pulpit, to communicate to people. Our community is structured such that people should be held accountable. When they do bad things, there should be a consequence.
Mm-hmm.
But when they pay the cost of their actions, you have to give them an opportunity to progress and create a better lives for themselves and our community. If you don't do that, you're locking them and your community into a bad scenario because people got to eat.
Right.
And so I think it's important for the mayor to understand that, communicate that, and advocate on that point throughout the community, not just within city government, but also other employers who have the opportunity to make decisions about who they hire and who they don't hire.
Mm-hmm. Another part of that is, it was good to see some of the local churches step up during the pandemic. I'm hoping, and maybe you can answer this question, are you hoping they follow that same thing when it comes to homelessness, mass incarceration, viral programs, soup kitchens? Do you think that that's something that you would not necessarily adopt at the city, but urge, nonprofits and churches to invest in that to create stability within the city?
For sure. I mean, all of our community members and partners, there's a tremendous need in our community for more support, even before COVID. and COVID's made it all the more urgent. So I would certainly encourage them to do that. But more importantly, it's kind of leading with your own actions first. And so it's not telling people that they should support a youth employment program when you have the ability to create a youth employment program yourself. And so definitely encouraging, but it's leading by example first. If you're gonna ask someone else, whether it's a church or nonprofit, to do something, because they also have budgets to meet and they're also struggling to keep lights on oftentimes themselves. If you're gonna ask them to do it, you do it first and help show them how we can all do better together.
And also, just one little note, could you explain or talk about bonds that, you know, that are passed through maybe city council at the local level? Can you just touch on a little, and the reason why I'm asking is because some people don't actually know what bonds are. Can you explain just for our listeners?
Yeah, so this is, so when I was younger, they would have called this the okey doke.
Okay.
I think nowadays they say, you know, folks are capping.
Okay.
So essentially, bonds are just like credit cards. You're just borrowing money now to pay for something you want now, but you still got to pay it back.
Okay.
And so the city is going to have, you know, next time folks vote, an opportunity for community members to say, yes, I want the city to have more bonds. And it's going to be $135 million. But it's just saying, city, you can get this credit card and you can borrow money.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that a project's going to happen.
Okay.
Because the city has to have money to pay for the things.
Okay.
And it's, you know.
So what would be, not to cut, what would be an example of something like that you can think of that's, you know, sort of basic?
Well, here's the okey doke.
Okay.
The bonds are authorized at a very generic level.
Okay.
$40 million for Parks and Recreation project.
Okay.
But when it's sold to the public, it's, we want to have this money for this particular rec center. But the city doesn't have to use it for that rec center.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned that.
And if the city doesn't have a plan to pay, you know, the charge on the credit card, the bonds, rec center doesn't happen on the same timeline.
Okay.
And so bonds aren't a substitute for actually planning and prioritizing.
Okay.
That's why you saw, even in 2016, the city authorized the city council to get a credit card.
Okay.
And there are a lot of projects that were talked about in connection with it. I think the city has just little over half of the money that it still can borrow in connection with those bonds. So, you know, that's why I say, you know, it's important for people to pay attention and understand what bonds are, you know, so you don't get the okey doke, so you understand when people are really capping on you, because it's really just about borrowing money. It's not actually necessarily about spending the money.
And as we close out, you know, are there any questions from the audience that you would like to ask?
When is the next election, local election?
Yeah. So question of when is the next local election? Primary election is going to be on May 17th. And I hope everyone in the city votes for Justin Outling then for mayor. And then the general election is going to be on July 26th. And also vote Outling for mayor there as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
And I'll add, I mean, it's going to be really important that our college students at, you know, G, A&T, Guilford College, Bennett, and everywhere really focus and early vote, because it was, you know, some of these election dates will be hitting during, you know, finals time. Obviously, the July election, a lot of students will be no longer in Greensboro, so it's important to, you know, recognize when the primary election happens on May 17th. Plan to vote early if you know that your finals land in a place where you can't do it on May 17th itself, and the same with regard to July 26th.
Okay, so since it's Black History Month, and I'll be remiss about, were there any black politicians, historical figures, or activists that inspired you on your journey to become a city council and actually, you know, an attorney?
Yeah, in both, former Chief Justice Henry Fry.
Okay.
Henry Fry, from Greensboro, lives in Greensboro. First African-American black person to be in our state legislature after Reconstruction. One of the first, essentially, assistant federal prosecutors in the southeastern United States. first black member of the North Carolina Supreme Court, and he has been a tremendous friend and mentor to me. Him and his wife, Shirley, who is, I think, one of the most amazing people in the history of the world, have been very supportive of my campaign for mayor and endorsed our campaign. And they have been just a tremendous support to me throughout my career, both in inspiration, kind of understanding what is possible and the good that you can do as an attorney and as an elected official in this world, but also just kind of in their support of our family. So, and definitely Chief Justice Henry Fry as well as Shirley Fry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, here at our podcast show, again, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. But again, we really appreciate you when you came in. I think it was a year ago. We were just across the street, and the reason why I say that is that when you're as a politician or as a person, but particularly, growing up as a kid, my dad was in the military. Having the opportunity to meet people who are running for office to me was everything, because you're right there in front of me. So if I'm able to reach out to you and so forth, kids as well, they need to know that you have their best interest. So showing up to events like that, I get it all the time. Mr. Hooker, I know years ago they were at it was a football game. Where's people from city council, and I think that should be done. And again, that you can't be everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think that conversation doesn't cost money.
Yeah, so true. So true.
And I think we kind of separate ourselves. And I'm a big proponent of that. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't get paid to just do, but again, if you don't do the body of the work, it's just mouthy. But is there anything that you want our viewers to know, people in the city of Greensboro, about your campaign? How can they? Do you have a hashtag, or how can they follow you, or can they, support the Outling campaign for mayor?
Yeah, and on that point, if you have events, if you have things, if you just want to talk about stuff, please reach out to me and let me know. It's really my great pleasure to serve. I'm working hard to earn everyone's support in connection with this mayoral campaign. So reach out to us at our website. It's voteoutling.com. We're all over social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, either at J Outling or Vote Outling. And working hard to earn everyone's support, whether it's knocking door to door, you'll be seeing ads on social media, all of those things. But really want to work hard to close the gap between Greensboro's potential and its reality, and appreciate everyone's support and encouragement, ideas and suggestions in that connection.
Yeah, and I see you got that shirt there. So
yeah.
So we can show our viewers,
So I come from a good household. My father is a bus driver, was a garbage man. My mother was in mental health. They gave me good values, including teaching me don't go to someone's house empty-handed. And so I definitely got you a Vote Outling t-shirt. Appreciate all support, as well as everything you're doing on the podcast. To share with people in community topics like reparations and explaining what it is, in addition to sharing the classics, EPMD and the like.
Oh yeah.
That's a lot. So appreciate all you're doing in the community.
Yeah, we appreciate again when we got the email, because we do have an article that was published about our podcast, and that's how we connected. Thanks to my publicist Yasmin, and then when I saw the email, I was kind of like, really? Yeah. I never meet a stranger, and so when that was brought to my attention, I said, let's do it. And again, I'm a people's person. I think we should all be, but we have done a lot here. We focus on the interns; they get a lot, and so having them being able to be in front of you and learn this information, it's educational.
I have a question.
Go ahead, sure.
So I feel like everybody has a turning point in their life where they want to pursue a certain career. Growing up, did you have a turning point where you were like, okay, I want to step in and get into politics and make a difference?
Yes.
Like, was there like an event or something?
So in terms of public service, it was serving on that city board on housing and saying, wow, we've really gone through these cases and we've cut the time to get a case resolved in half. That's tremendous. But that's not big enough. That doesn't change the structure. And so for me, it was being on that board and seeing that doing great things on an individual level, but it's still tinkering on the edges because there needs to be a change of the structure to make this better. That was the turning point with regard to public service. But for me as an attorney, it was seeing my mother, she worked in mental health effectively as a social worker. There was an attorney who helped out someone who was experiencing a mental illness and completely changed that person's world for the better. And I was like, that's something. I want to help people and be able to have a big impact on their lives and supporting their families. And so that's when I said, this law thing, it can be a real tool that you can do for good.
Okay. Any other questions? Ms. Smith, you got any questions?
Not right now. After I don't want to make the podcast longer than it should.
Okay. So, Diggin In The Crates hip hop podcast, the Hooker and Mac show. If my co-host was here, he dropped some golden nuggets, but I think we've said enough today. Again, where hip hop meets politics. Follow us on social media at Diggin In The Crates. Follow us on Instagram. And if you have any suggestions or any questions, hit us up at Hooker and Mcadoo at gmail.com. And perhaps if you want to be on the show, you can email us as well, and we will be sure to get back with you. Now, what we always say, on every beat on the record lies jazz, gospel, opera, rock and roll, soul music, because this is Diggin In The Crates hip hop podcast, the Hooker and Mac show, and we'll be coming to a city near you. Again, I am your host, the hip hop wizard. I don't have my mask on, but typically I will wear it. But Diggin In The Crates hip hop podcast, the Hooker and Mac show, and we'll see you later.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. Standing on the hanging out the window, watching all the cars go by, roaring as the breeze blow.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
Interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Diggin In The Crates podcast is to showcase the history of the culture of hip-hop, the art of sampling, hip-hop and politics, beatboxing and the MC, and the underground hip-hop. This group of hosts and students coordinates community-oriented events such as breakdancing classes, MC challenges, back-to-school drives, conflict resolution seminars with the youth, and graffiti workshops. These opportunities work to give podcast exposure as well as your company. The podcast show provides students of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University with internship opportunities in the fields such as production, communication, technical engineering, and team building. For more information, please contact Ernest Hooker at 336-392-9279.
The Primetime Sports segment is focused on reporting the latest news in HBCUs, locals, and professional sports. HBCU sports are not reported enough. Coverage of HBCU sports on national television is virtually non-existent. His interest in sportscasting led him to establishing the Primetime Sports podcast.
The Balanced Behavior segment discusses the relationship matters and the scenarios of couples during a daily basis. They share tips to get along with your significant other and most common issues on a relationship. The podcast focuses on good company and meaningful connections with your partner. The podcast was a platform that decided to put together because they felt they had a story to tell and experience to share with others. Balanced Behavior was established in September of 2019 and is a podcast centered on life, parenting, and relationships. Hosted by Brooke and Xavier Carrington, the duo is a fresh take on Black love. Make sure you follow them on Instagram at BalanceBehavior1.
The Diggin In The Crates hip-hop podcast welcomes your support of embarking and enriching the community of the tri-state area with the study of exploration of hip-hop. We look forward to building a community relationship with each of you. Thank you for your time and consideration. If you're looking to find us, we're located on 1400 Battleground Avenue, Suite 100H.